Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. I think everyone at some point has had that light bulb moment. They've thought, oh, this would make an amazing company. So today we're diving into whether or not launching a startup company is the right move for your big idea. And to help us figure all this out, we'll be taking excerpts from Entrepreneur's podcast, Launching a Startup Company. So is a startup really the best path forward for every great idea?
It's funny how we often just assume that any great idea should automatically become a company. But, that's not always the case. Sometimes that amazing innovation you have would actually be better suited for a totally different environment, like maybe an academic lab or even a larger existing company with the resources to, actually scale it quickly.
So how do you decide which route to take? How do you know if a startup is the best path for you and your idea? I was reading through the source material, and they lay out 7 key factors to consider. And I have to say, it's not as simple as I thought.
Yeah, definitely not a simple yes or no answer. I like to think of it kind of like a diagnostic test for your idea, right? So the source breaks it down into demand. Basically, does the tech you're working with have, broad appeal? Then there's competition. Who else is already out there doing something similar to your idea? Next up is licensing. Is that even an option for you? Could you, partner with an existing company instead of going solo with your own startup? And of course, the big one, funding. How are you actually going to fuel your growth? Will you be able to secure the funding you need to succeed?
Right. Funding is always a big one.
It is. But then there are those more personal aspects, like commitment. Are you really ready for the roller coaster of startup life? Can you handle the pressure? And then support. Do you have the right people around you, mentors, advisors, people to guide you along the way? And finally, management. Do you have the team you need, or are you prepared to build one?
Wow, you weren't kidding. It really does seem like you need to examine your idea from, every possible angle before diving into the startup world head first. It's not just about the idea itself. It's about the entire world that surrounds it.
You got it. You have to think big picture. And then once you've, carefully weighed those 7 factors, if you're still feeling confident about starting your own company, the source material gives 9 crucial questions to ask yourself before you even, think about writing a business plan.
Right. Kind of like a pre-launch checklist.
Hmm.
The first question really caught my eye. Is this a disruptive technology? What impact will it have on the world? It seems like these days, everyone is looking for the next disruption, right?
It's definitely a buzzword you hear a lot, but it's popular for a reason. Disruptive technologies can completely change how we live and work. Think about how the internet or smartphones changed the world. Massive impact. But it's not just about, slapping a disruption label on something. The key is understanding the potential impact of your innovation. Could it really change things?
So you're saying if your invention really does have the potential to be a game changer, then that's a pretty big point in favor of choosing the startup path.
Definitely a point in your favor. But it's not all about the tech itself. Question number 6 on the list really stood out to me. What will your role be in this new company? Think about it.
Yeah.
Are you going to be CEO, a full-time employee, or more of an advisor? This is where things get personal.
Yeah, it's about honestly assessing your own level of commitment. What do you really want your involvement to look like? Do you want to be, down in the trenches working every day? Or are you more comfortable taking a step back?
You have to be self-aware because, launching a startup is incredibly demanding. And I mean that on a personal and professional level. You need to honestly assess your own, your strengths, your weaknesses, what you're really passionate about, and frankly, what you're willing to sacrifice to make this company happen.
Yeah, sacrifices for sure. And of course, you can't talk about startups without talking about the money. Question number 9, get straight to the point. How much is your company really worth?
This whole idea of pre-money valuation has always sounded a little mysterious to me, to be honest.
I know, right? It's one of those terms you hear thrown around a lot, but it's not actually as complicated as it sounds. So pre-money valuation is basically what investors believe your company is worth before they put any money in. And the source said that early-stage companies often get valued somewhere between $1 and $3 million. But, that number can be pretty deceptive.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. How do they decide how much a startup is worth at this stage? Is there some, secret formula? There's no magic formula. But there are definitely some key things that influence valuation. Investors look at things like proof of concept data. So have you actually validated your idea? Do you have prototypes? Do you have, maybe even more importantly, paying customers already? The further along you are in developing your product and showing people that it's actually viable, the higher your valuation is likely to be.
So even before you've officially launched, you already have a price tag.
You do, and it's a lot of pressure. But you know what? The source actually had some really good advice for this whole process. They basically said, don't try to do this alone. Like, get advice from people. Having mentors or advisors who have been there can be a huge help.
It makes sense to talk it out, get feedback from people you trust. But what about potential customers? Should you be sharing your idea with them at this early stage?
Actually, yeah. Talking to potential customers is crucial. It's not just about getting them to say yes or no to your idea. It's about getting their feedback, which can help you shape your product or service even before you invest tons of time and resources into it.
So you're saying it's not just about validation, it's about using that customer feedback to make your product even better.
Exactly. Think of it as like market research in action, you know? And investors actually like to see that you've done this. It shows them that you're serious. But to really make the most of those conversations, you have to ask the right questions. And our source gives a really great framework for doing just that.
It sounds like knowing your customer is like absolutely key EY if you want to build a successful startup.
Right.
But how do you go beyond like a surface level understanding of them? How do you really get into their, their wants and their needs? The source material mentions asking the right questions. So I'm curious, like, what do those questions actually look like?
Well, you have to move from assumptions to real insights, right? And the source material gives a bunch of targeted questions to help you really figure out, like, who your ideal customer really is. Like, for example, one of the first questions is, who are your customers? But it's not just about basic demographics like their age or where they live. It's more about understanding their needs. What are their pain points? What keeps them up at night? That kind of thing.
So you're saying it's about like going deeper than just their problems, right? It's about figuring out what motivates them and what's really important to them.
Exactly. You have to get to the heart of it. Like, let's say you're developing, I don't know, a time-saving app. Okay, is your customer using this app because they want to be more efficient? Or because they want to have more free time to do the things they love? I mean, those are different motivations, right? And that can lead to different features in your app.
It makes sense. You really need to understand what your customers care about. And then you can build what they actually want. But how do you know if your product is really, truly the thing that's going to solve their problem? I feel like there's a difference between a cool idea and, something that's actually going to work.
That's when it's time to, put your idea to the test. The source really encourages you to ask yourself, can my product, my service, can it really solve this problem? And can it do it better, faster, or cheaper than what's already out there?
So you have to be honest with yourself, like brutally honest. I mean, it's one thing to have a cool idea,
Yeah.
but it's totally different to prove that it actually fixes a real problem and that it's better than, whatever solution people are already using. So if the answer is no, does that mean it's back to square one?
Maybe. Or maybe it's time to, pivot, change directions a little. That's kind of the beauty of the startup world, It's flexible, you can adapt. But to do that, you really need to understand who you're up against. That's why that next question is so important. Okay, how are people already dealing with this problem? What solutions are they using right now? And, what are the good things about those solutions? And what are the bad things?
So it's about doing your research, figuring out what your competitors are doing. It sounds like by doing that competitive analysis, you might actually discover some opportunities to make your product different, right? Like what can you offer that nobody else is doing?
Exactly. What's going to make you stand out from the crowd? What's your secret sauce? Why should the customer choose you?
And that's where storytelling comes in, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to explain why your product is so great in a way that really connects with people.
Definitely. You need a good story. But you also need to have the data to back it up. You have to be able to prove that your product actually does what you say it does.
Right, proof. Okay, speaking of data, the source also dives into the question of market size. Like how many people are out there who might actually be interested in buying what you're selling? This feels like a really important piece of the puzzle.
It is. You need to understand how many people you could potentially reach. So you need to research, who lives in your target market, but also what are they interested in? What do they believe in? Is this a small niche market Or is it a big, broad audience? That will impact your entire business strategy.
Right, it all connects. Knowing how big your market is will affect everything from your price to how you market your product. It's interesting to see how it all fits together.
It does all connect. And that leads us to, honestly, maybe the most important question. How much will people pay to solve this problem? I mean, you could have the best product in the world, but if nobody wants to pay enough for it, you're not going to stay in business for very long.
That's where it gets real, right? Pricing seems like a very delicate balancing act.
It is. You have to find that sweet spot. What are customers willing to pay? And what do you need to charge to actually make a profit? There's so much to consider, like how much does it cost to make your product? What are your competitors charging? And of course, how much profit do you need to make?
Much.
To do.
Think about. But you're right. You have to understand what your customer is willing to pay, because then you can create a pricing strategy that works for everyone.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here. We started with figuring out if a startup is even the right choice. Then we jumped into all the things you have to think about before you even launch. And then we really got into the minds of your potential customers.
We sure have. It's been a true deep dive. And I have to say, we've only just scratched the surface of what it takes to launch a successful startup. But now comes the fun part. Funding. Yes, funding. Getting the money to actually bring your vision to life. So the source material talks about the importance of understanding all the different ways to get funding. But I'm curious, what does that world look like for startups today? I mean, it's pretty amazing how much work goes into even just like preparing to launch a startup. I mean, we've talked about evaluating your idea, figuring out who your target customer is, and then like how much your company's actually worth. But now I think we're finally getting to the really exciting part, actually getting the money to make your dream a reality.
It's definitely the moment where things start to feel, real. Like you're going from an idea you have to an actual business. And the source material really stresses how important it is to understand all the different kinds of funding that are out there for startups. And honestly, that can feel kind of overwhelming, Like, where do you even start?
Yeah, I feel that. It's like a whole new language. You hear all these terms, angel investors, venture capitalists, crowdfunding. Like, how do you know which one is the right one for you and your company?
It's tough. There's really no one right answer. It all depends on what stage your company is at, how much money do you need, and then even your own personal comfort level with risk. But before you even think about going to investors, you need to have a really good pitch, because this is your chance to make a first impression and tell your story. And, convince these people that your startup is worth investing in.
Oh, I bet that's nerve-wracking. Pitching to investors, is there a secret to giving a good pitch? Like, what are investors really looking for?
They want you to answer some really key questions. So first and foremost, what problem are you solving? And is it a big enough problem that, it's worth their money? Then they want to hear about your solution. So how does your product or your service actually address the problem? And how is it unique and effective? And of course, they're going to want to know about your team. Do you have the right people? The people who can actually make this happen?
It's about proving that you have more than just a good idea, right? You have to show them you have a real solution and a team that can execute it. I'm guessing investors also want to see, a plan for how you're going to make money.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They want to see how you're going to generate revenue. And they're going to want to see your financial projections. And those projections better be realistic. It's about showing them that if they invest, their money has a good chance of actually making them more money.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a lot to cover in a pitch. But let's say you've nailed your pitch, you got some investors interested. What happens next?
Then comes the due diligence. So now the investors are going to dig in, They want to look closely at your business plan, your financial projections. They might even look into your team's background and experience. It's like a background check for your company.
Because they're not just going to take your word for it.
Yeah. Nope. They're going to do their research. They might ask for testimonials from your customers, market research data, maybe even prototypes of your product. They're trying to reduce the risk and make sure their money is safe. And speaking of investors, I think it's helpful to break down the different types you might come across. So the source mentions angel investors, venture capitalists, and crowdfunding.
Those terms always make me a little nervous. What are the differences between them?
Okay, so angel investors are usually people, wealthy individuals who invest their own money in companies that are just starting out. They're often entrepreneurs themselves, so they really get it. They understand the startup world. Then you have venture capitalists. They manage funds from lots of different sources, and they usually invest in companies that are a little further along, companies that have a track record and are growing fast.
So angel investors are more early stage and venture capitalists come in later.
Usually, yeah. Although, there are always exceptions. And then there's crowdfunding. This is where you get money from lots of different people, usually through websites. This can be a really good option if you don't need a ton of money, or if you really want to build a community around your product.
It's really interesting how many ways there are to get funding.
Yeah.
But no matter how you get the money, the source makes a really good point about understanding all the terms of the deal.
Yes. That's super important. You have to be really clear on how much ownership you're giving up, how much control you'll have in making decisions for your company, and what your investors expect from you. Seriously, get a lawyer to look over any agreement before you sign anything.
It's like you're entering into a partnership, right? You bring your idea and your team, and the investors bring the money.
Exactly. It's a team effort. And having the right investors can make a huge difference for your company. You want people who believe in your idea, but who can also give you advice and connect you with the right people. But even if you have a great idea, you have the money, and a solid plan, there's one more thing that people often forget about, and that's building a good team.
Yeah, the source material touches on the importance of having a good management team. But I'm curious, how do you actually build a team that can make a startup successful? I mean, where do you even start?
Building a strong team is so important. And it's not just about, hiring people with the right skills. It's about finding people who really care about what your company's doing. People who are tough and can deal with challenges. And people who can keep up in a fast-paced environment, because startups move fast.
So you're looking for people who really believe in the company's mission. People who want to be part of something bigger than just a job.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another really important part of building a team: company culture. So what kind of environment do you want to create at your company? Do you want it to be super competitive and focused on results? Or do you want something more relaxed and collaborative?
It's interesting how much company culture can affect people's experience at work. Like, a good company culture will attract people and make them want to stay. But a bad one can make people burn out and leave quickly.
Totally. It's something you have to think about early on, and it's something you have to keep working on as your team grows. But even attracting good people, especially in the startup world, that can be tough.
I mean, startups are competing with bigger, more established companies that can offer things like higher salaries and better benefits. So how do you convince people to join your startup when you're just starting out?
You have to sell them on the dream. Why is this work important? How will it change the world? People are often drawn to companies that, have a bigger purpose.
So you're appealing to their sense of idealism, their desire to make a real difference. And I've also heard that offering equity in the company can be a good incentive, especially for those early employees.
Oh, yeah, definitely. When you give employees equity, you're basically giving them ownership in the company, often in the form of stock options. So their success is directly tied to the company's success. That can be really motivating. But attracting talent is only half the battle, right? You have to keep those awesome people.
That's true. So how do you keep your employees happy and engaged so they stick around?
You have to make it a place where they can grow and develop. Give your team chances to learn new things, take on new challenges, and move up in the company. You should also recognize and reward their hard work. And I don't just mean money, praise them publicly and give them chances to be leaders.
It's about creating an environment where people feel like they're really part of a team, where their work is valued, and where they're invested in the success of the company.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, your team is your most important asset. Invest in them, help them grow, and create an environment where they can thrive. Because at the end of the day, your company will only be as successful as the people who work there.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of startups, I think it would be helpful to go over the key things we talked about. So we started by asking, is a startup even the right choice for your idea? Then we talked about all the things you need to consider before you launch, like understanding the market and figuring out your own level of commitment.
Right. And then we talked about, how to actually get money for your startup. We talked about pitching, different types of funding, and making sure you're working with the right investors.
And last but not least, we landed on building an amazing team, which is super important for any startup. We covered how to attract and keep great people and how to create a company culture where everyone can do their best work.
It's been a long journey. We covered a lot, but I hope you're walking away feeling excited and ready to take those first steps toward launching your own startup.
Me too. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a question to think about. Imagine you've done it all right. You have the money, you have a great team, and your product is ready to go. What's the one thing you would do to make sure your startup really stands out? Make it different from everyone else out there.
That's a really good question. In today's world, you have to be different. So think about what makes your company special. Think about who you want to reach. And think about the story you want to tell. What will make your company unforgettable? What will make people want to be a part of it?
We really encourage you to keep learning. Read about successful startups, connect with other entrepreneurs, and most importantly, never stop dreaming big.
The world needs your ideas. And hey, maybe someday we'll be featuring your startup on the deep dive.
That's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of startups.
Until next time, keep learning, keep innovating, and keep diving deep.